My daughter-in-law insisted on taking a separate car. While I was driving, my grandson whispered, "Grandma, it's a trap. Mom tricked you." I slammed on the brakes, frozen, as I discovered the terrifying plan. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I was driving the old family minivan with my grandson Dylan behind me. The streets were crowded, the sound of horns blaring everywhere. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to adjust my angle, and I saw Dylan's strange face. He was hugging his backpack tightly, his face pale, his eyes wide, full of worry. I felt a knot in my chest. "Dylan, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice soft. "Did you feel sick at school?" Dylan lowered his head, bit his lip, and didn't answer. He was silent for a long time, so long that I started to think something was really wrong. Then, in a trembling voice, almost a whisper, he said, "Grandma, I have to tell you something." "Grandma, it's a trap. Mom tricked you." His words startled me. My hands gripped the steering wheel involuntarily. I slowed down and pulled over where the horns were quieter. "Speak, honey," I said, forcing myself to stay calm, although inside everything was already churning. Dylan looked up, his eyes glassy. "I heard Mom and Uncle Mark talking last night." He paused as if he needed courage, and then continued in a rush. "They want to hurt Dad." His words were like a punch to the chest. I turned down the volume on the radio. The oldies music that was playing cut off abruptly. Dylan gripped the straps of his backpack tightly, his voice shaking. "I woke up in the night because I was thirsty. I went down to the kitchen and heard Mom. She was calling Uncle Mark. I hid behind the door and heard them talking about Mr. Henry and fake papers." "Monsieur." I looked at my grandson in the rearview mirror. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid he could hear it. "What did you say?" I asked. My voice was breaking. Dylan took a deep breath, as if repeating every word from memory. "Mom said that after the shareholder meeting, Dad will look like an embezzler. Uncle Mark laughed and said everything was ready." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Jason, my son, a good man, dedicated to working for his family, was being betrayed by his own wife and his brother-in-law. I put on my turn signal and stopped the car completely on the side of the road. Outside, a newspaper vendor walked by shouting, but I couldn't understand anything. My mind only replayed Dylan's words like a storm tearing through every thought. Dylan lowered his head and murmured, "I'm really scared, Grandma. If I tell Dad, he's going to get mad at me because he always trusts Mom." His words tore my heart apart. Dylan, my 12-year-old grandson, was carrying a secret far too big for his small shoulders. I reached my hand back, taking his, which was trembling. "You're the only one I dare to tell." Dylan continued, his eyes red. "I don't want them to hurt Dad." I squeezed my grandson's hand tightly, holding back tears. "Honey, you did the right thing by telling me," I said with a shaky voice. "I will find a way." "Don't be afraid." Just then, a deafening horn honked behind me, rushing me to keep driving. It startled me. I started the engine hurriedly, but my hands were sweaty and the steering wheel was slipping. On the way, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Dylan turning his head again and again toward the window, as if he was afraid someone was following him. The boy shrank, his eyes full of panic. I tried to stay calm, but right at the intersection, a familiar black car sped past. Mark, with a cold face, shot me a quick glance before disappearing into traffic. Dylan whispered, his voice trembling, "Did you see Grandma?" I wasn't lying. I nodded, my throat dry. Mark, the younger brother who always showed up with a fake smile, was now revealed to me like a ghost. I kept driving, but my mind was a whirlwind. Dylan's words echoed one by one like hammer blows against my already fragile trust. Evelyn, my daughter-in-law, the one who said she loved me like a mother, what was she planning? And Mark Henry, what part did they play in all this? I thought about Jason, about how he blindly trusted his wife. The pain shot through my chest, but I knew I couldn't let Dylan see me weak. The boy was already scared enough. As we got closer to home, Dylan lowered his voice, pleading, "Grandma, please don't tell my mom I told you this. She's going to hate me." His words were like a plea that made me want to hug him tight. I nodded, stopping the car in front of the gate. "I promise, honey," I said, forcing a reassuring smile. But as I got out of the car, I saw Evelyn at the door with her arms crossed and her scrutinizing gaze on me and Dylan. The boy hid behind me as if wanting to disappear. Evelyn smiled coldly, her voice sweet but icy. "Did you come to drop off Dylan, Mom? It's very late. Was there a lot of traffic?" I swallowed hard and replied with a tense smile. "Yes, a little traffic." Then I took Dylan's hand and we went inside quickly with uneasy hearts. Evelyn was still there, her eyes fixed on my back like daggers. I knew she was suspicious and that I had to be more careful than ever. Once inside, I took Dylan to his room and tucked him in. Seeing his innocent face, I told myself, "Rose, you have to protect him. You have to protect Jason." But deep down, fear was consuming me. I was just an old woman with trembling hands and a heart full of scars. Would I have enough strength to face what was coming? After Dylan's fear-filled whispers, it was impossible for me to fall asleep. My mind went back to the old days, those days when I thought I had found a new home after my husband's death. But now looking back, all I saw was a chain of wounds on my soul, moments when I was pushed aside, and a house that slowly turned cold and strange. When Jason welcomed me to live with his family, I cried with joy. My husband's death had left an immense void, and I thought I would never overcome that loneliness. Jason took my hand and told me, "Mom, come live with me. I'll take care of you. You won't be lonely here." Those words were like the first rays of sun, warming my old heart. Evelyn, my daughter-in-law, hugged me back then and smiled enthusiastically. "I consider you my own mother. Don't worry, this house is your house." I believed her. I really believed her. I thought I had found a place to lean on, a place to live my last years, surrounded by my family's love. But that joy didn't last. During the first few months, everything seemed warm. I would sit in the living room telling Dylan stories, cooking Jason's favorite dishes from his childhood. Evelyn kept smiling, kept talking, although I was already starting to notice there was something forced in that smile. Then little by little, she started imposing silent rules like invisible threads tightening around me. One afternoon, while I was watching Dylan play in the living room, she came in with her cell phone in her hand, speaking in a soft but icy voice. "Mom, if people come over, go rest in your room for a bit. The living room needs to look tidy." I nodded, thinking she just wanted to keep up appearances. But then again and again, every time there were visitors, she repeated it, looking at me with those eyes that seemed to push me away. I started to feel like I no longer belonged in that living room. One day Evelyn called me into the kitchen and pointed to a small room right next to it, which they used to use for storing old things. "Mom, I think you'll be more comfortable in here. The room upstairs is a bit far and it's hard for you to climb." I stayed quiet, looking at that dark room without a single window for sunlight to enter. I wanted to say something, to ask why, but seeing her cold smile, I just nodded and dragged my suitcase inside. The first night in that room, lying on the old bed, I heard the dripping of the kitchen faucet and felt like I was being kicked out of my own family. Family meals, which used to be my greatest joy, became painful. Evelyn always sat at the head of the table talking and laughing loudly, while I remained silent at the end of the table like a shadow. Once I passed a piece of meat to Jason, hoping he would remember the dishes his mother used to cook for him. But Evelyn looked at me out of the corner of her eye, and with a sweet but mocking voice said, "Mom, he's old enough to serve himself, don't worry." I lowered my head, the chopsticks trembling in my hands. Jason just smiled uncomfortably and said, "Mom, Evelyn worries about me. Don't take it the wrong way." But he didn't see his wife's look that clearly told me I had no place in that house anymore. Dylan was the only light in those dark days. The boy used to run to my room with his notebooks asking me for help with his homework. "Grandma, I don't understand this problem," he would tell me, his eyes shining as I explained patiently. In those moments sitting together, I felt like I still existed, that I was still useful. Every night I sewed his clothes stitch by stitch, putting a little of the love I had for him into every thread. I kept repeating to myself, as long as I have Dylan, I have a reason to stay in this house. But Evelyn wouldn't leave it alone. Once, while I was telling Dylan stories about when his grandfather and I were young, she came in and interrupted me. "Those old things just confuse him, Mom. Dylan, go study English that will actually be useful for him." Dylan looked at me with apologetic eyes and let his mother pull him by the hand. I stayed there with the story half finished, feeling a sharp pain in my chest. I wanted to scream that those memories weren't old, that they were the root of this family. But I kept silent because I knew my voice no longer carried any weight. Jason, my son, was buried in his work at the company. He trusted Evelyn blindly to the point of blindness. Every time I tried to talk to him about her attitude, he cut me off. "Mom, Evelyn worries about me, about everyone in the house." "Don't overthink it." I wanted to tell him about those cold stares, those words sharp as knives, but I was afraid he would see me as a bothersome old woman, just like she wanted him to think. One night, I brought a tray with water to the living room, where Jason, Evelyn, and Mark were talking about business. I put the tray on this table, trying to say something to join the conversation, but Evelyn smiled with contempt. "Mom, just leave it there. The maid could have brought it." Her words pierced me like a knife. All my life I took care of every glass of water, every meal for my husband and children, and now they treated me like an outsider, just like an employee. I turned around, holding back tears, clenching my teeth so they wouldn't see me weak. Those days I started to realize that this house was no longer my house. It was cold from the walls to the stairs. Evelyn had built an invisible wall to push me out, to make me feel like a stranger in my own family. I endured it for Jason, for Dylan, but every day I felt smaller, more useless. There were nights when I stayed in the dark room, looking at the faint light from the desk, wondering, why am I still here? Who am I in this house? But it was precisely in that cold where Dylan's whisper last night fell on me like a lightning bolt. The annoyances, the looks of contempt, Evelyn's unspoken rules, turned out to not just be indifference. They were part of a bigger plan, a conspiracy that I still couldn't see clearly. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, but inside me there was only darkness. After a sleepless night, Dylan's trembling words kept echoing in my head. I knew I had to act to talk to Jason before everything spun out of control. I stood in the hallway, clutching the edge of my blouse, waiting for Jason to get ready for work. The sound of him looking for his car keys, the scrape of his leather shoes on the wooden floor. It all felt familiar, but today it made my heart beat faster. I took a deep breath, tried to keep my voice calm, and called him. "Jason, son, I need to talk to you seriously." He stopped, his briefcase suspended in the air. Jason frowned, his tired gaze fixed on me. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked with a tone that showed his impatience. I glanced around, making sure Evelyn wasn't nearby. The hallway was silent, only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. I lowered my voice and summarized what Dylan had heard last night. Evelyn's voice on the phone talking about the shareholder meeting, about how to turn Jason into a thief, and that name Mark, which appeared in the middle of that secret conversation. I tried to keep my tone even, although my chest felt tight having to say those things about my daughter-in-law. As soon as I mentioned Evelyn and Mark, Jason's face hardened. He furrowed his brow and answered me with more harshness than I expected. "Mom, don't make things up about them. I know Evelyn. She would never do something like that." His words hurt me like a knife, not because of the anger, but because of the blindness in them. I forced myself to stay calm. I clenched my fists so I wouldn't tremble. Son Dylan heard it clearly. They talked about Henry, about fake papers. "You can't take this lightly," I pleaded, hoping he would react. But Jason shook his head and let out a heavy sigh. "Dylan is just a kid, Mom. He probably misunderstood. I'm exhausted with work. Don't make things more complicated." His words were like a bucket of cold water to the face. I wanted to scream, to shake him, so he would open his eyes, but I just stood there, immobile, feeling helpless. Just then, heels clicked against the floor. Evelyn came out of the room with her purse in her hand, her face flawless with makeup, but her gaze sharp as a knife. She looked at me and smiled falsely before wrapping her arms around Jason. "I'm going to the bank, honey," she said in a syrupy voice. Then she looked at me without losing that smile. "Mom, rest at home. Don't get involved in matters that don't concern you." Her words were like a slap out of her reach. She wanted to make it clear that I had no place in that house, that I had no right to an opinion. I stood still, feeling how I was being pushed out of my own family. Jason kissed his wife on the cheek, oblivious to the poison in her words. "I'm going to work. We'll talk tonight," he told me, but in a distant tone, as if I were a stranger. He walked quickly to the door, leaving me alone in the hallway. I heard the car engine start and drive away, taking with it what little hope I had left. I turned and found Dylan's gaze peering from the staircase. The boy was there, his hand gripping the railing, his eyes wide open, full of disappointment. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I knew I heard everything." Dylan had hoped his dad would believe, but Jason, as always, chose to side with Evelyn. I approached him, stroked his head, and tried to smile. "It's okay, honey. Grandma will find a way." But inside it hurt as if I were being torn apart. Dylan just nodded and then went up to his room in silence. His shoulders slumped, carrying a weight too heavy for his age. That afternoon, Evelyn put on another scene. She ordered Teresa, the maid, to set only 3 plates at the main table, one for her, one for Jason, and one for Dylan. When I entered the dining room, she looked at me and said in a soft but cold voice, "Mom, eat later. There's plenty of food in the kitchen." I stood paralyzed, as if I had been robbed of the last place in the family. Jason was there, his gaze fixed on a pile of papers, not paying attention. Dylan looked at me, wanting to say something, but his mother pulled him to sit next to her. "Sit here, Dylan, don't run around." I went back to the kitchen in silence. I sat at the old wooden table and ate alone. Every bite tasted bitter, not because of the food, but because of the loneliness that was suffocating me. I looked at the plate in front of me and remembered those meals from before, when my husband was still alive, when Jason was a child, when the whole family gathered around the table with laughter. Now, all I had left was a cold kitchen and looks of contempt. I wondered what I had done wrong, why I had become a leftover in my own family. The tears wanted to come, but I wiped them away immediately. I didn't want anyone to see me like this. I had to be strong for Dylan, for Jason, even if I was breaking inside. In the evening, when Jason returned home, I decided to try one more time. I waited for him in the living room while Evelyn was busy in her office. "Jason," I called him with a trembling voice, "I know you don't want to listen, but I have to say it. Dylan is not lying. What he heard about Henry, about the fake papers, you have to be careful." I looked him in the eyes, hoping he would see my sincerity. But Jason raised his hand to stop me. "Mom, that's enough. I trust my wife. Get some rest, don't complicate things." His words were like a final hammer blow, shattering the little hope I had left. I stood immobile, watching my son walk away without turning back once. He trusted Evelyn more than his own mother, more than his own son's warnings. I felt like I was being expelled not just from the house, but also from Jason's heart. I returned to my room, closed the door, and sat in the old chair. The lamp was still on, flickering faintly, just like my life at that moment. Dim, lonely, and uncared for. I thought about Dylan, about the disappointment in his eyes when his dad didn't believe him. I thought about Evelyn, about her fake smile and sharp words. I thought about Mark, about the laugh Dylan heard in the dark. My chest tightened, not just from the pain of my son rejecting me, but also from the fear that this plan would end up destroying Jason, finishing this whole family. I clenched my fists tightly, my nails digging into my palm, fighting not to break down. I knew my warnings had been lost in the void and that I was being pushed further out every day. That night, I left the house when the pale moon was hanging in the sky. My heart was heavy, as if I were dragging Dylan's whispers and Jason's indifference. I walked the familiar path that led to the church where I had once found some peace on the hardest days. The night wind was cold, blowing through my gray hair, but it couldn't dispel the feeling of unease that gripped my chest. I needed someone to listen to me, someone to believe me, and I only thought of Father Michael, an old family friend. When I pushed the heavy wooden door of the church, Father Michael was standing by the altar. The candlelight illuminated his kind face. When he saw me, he put his hand on my shoulder. His voice was warm but full of concern. "Rose, you look very tired. What's wrong?" I sat on the wooden pew, my trembling hands clasped together. I told him everything from what Dylan had heard in the night Evelyn and Mark's plan to how Jason dismissed my warnings. Every word that came out of my mouth was like a stab to my own heart, painful and helpless. "I don't know what to do, Father," I whispered, tears about to fall. "My son doesn't believe me. He thinks I just want to cause trouble, but Dylan, my grandson, is scared. I can't let them destroy Jason." Father Michael became thoughtful. His eyes looked far away as if weighing each word. He took my hand and said in a firm voice, "Rose, if you stay silent, evil will triumph. You are the only one who sees the truth right now. You must find a way to bring it to light no matter how hard it is." His words were like a ray of light in the darkness, but they also filled me with fear. I was just a 65-year-old woman. How could I face such a plan when not even my own son trusted me? But Father Michael's gaze, full of faith and encouragement, didn't let me turn away. I nodded, murmuring, "I'll try Father for Dylan for Jason." On the way home, I decided to stop by the house of Chloe, the young neighbor who once worked in a law office. Chloe was always kind. She used to bring me sweets and chat about old times. I knew she was sharp, and I needed someone like her now. When I knocked on the door, Chloe came out to open it. She smiled broadly, but her smile disappeared when she saw my face. "Mrs. Rose, what's wrong? Come in, please," she said, leading me to her small, cozy living room. I took out of my pocket some copies of papers that Jason had left forgotten on the dining room table the day before. They were company documents full of numbers and signatures that I had secretly kept, although I didn't know if they were important. Chloe took them and reviewed them carefully under her desk lamp. She squinted her eyes and pointed to a seal and a signature. "Mrs. Rose, this shows signs of forgery. The seal doesn't match the official one and the signature. The stroke isn't natural." I froze, my heart pounding. "You mean they are really doing something illegal?" I asked with a trembling voice. Chloe nodded, serious. "You must be careful. This involves several people, and they won't hesitate to harm you. Don't trust anyone except those who are truly on your side." She pulled a small USB drive from a drawer and handed it to me. "If you can get more data or any recordings, give them to me. I'll review them." I clutched the USB in my hand, feeling it like a small but sharp weapon. "Thank you, Chloe," I said with a broken voice. "I don't know if I'll be able to, but I have to try." Chloe put her hand on mine, smiled, and told me, "You are stronger than you think. I trust you." Her words gave me a little strength, although fear still reigned inside me. When I got home, I saw Dylan sitting studying in the corner of the living room, his gaze lost. When he saw me, the boy raised his head and asked with a worried voice, "Grandma, did you find someone who believes us?" I stroked his hair, forcing a smile. "Yes, honey, but we have to be patient. We have to be careful." Dylan nodded, but his eyes were still full of anguish. I knew the boy was scared of his mother, scared of what was happening in the very house where he lived. I hugged him tight and whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you or your dad. I promise you." Dylan squeezed my hand as if it were his only support. That night, as I was about to turn off the light to sleep, a small noise in the yard startled me. I walked on tiptoe, moved the curtain, and hid behind the window. There, I saw Evelyn and Mark standing very close together under the dim light. They were passing a folder of documents, speaking in low but icy voices. I strained my ears, trying to catch every word. Evelyn said in a calculating voice, "If my mother-in-law suspects anything, have Claire spread the rumor that she's losing her mind. Everyone will think she's a senile old woman." Mark let out a short laugh and nodded. "That's right. No one will suspect us." I felt a chill run down my spine. I clung to the curtain so I wouldn't fall. Not only did they want to destroy Jason, they also planned to turn people against me, make me look like a crazy woman. I quickly grabbed the little notebook that was on the table and wrote down word for word, detail for detail, my hand trembling so much that the letters came out crooked. I knew those phrases were proof, small but valuable, that could be the key to unmasking them. I sat on the bed with my heart pounding, feeling like I was walking on a path full of thorns. I was scared, but I couldn't stop. Not for me, but for Dylan, for Jason, and for the truth I had to protect. The next morning I went back to the church to find Father Michael. He was sweeping the patio, serene as always. But when I told him what I had heard last night about Evelyn and Mark's plan, his face turned serious. He sat next to me and said in a grave voice, "Rose, you have to be prepared. This is no longer just a family matter. This is organized crime. They won't stop until they get what they want." I dug my nails into my palm as I clenched my hands. "Then what do I do, Father? I'm just an old woman without power, without strength." He looked at me firmly. "You have the heart of a mother, Rose, and that is the greatest strength there is. Keep gathering evidence, but don't let them know what you're doing." In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house became heavier than ever, as if an invisible storm was about to break. I felt the change not just in the way Evelyn looked at me, but also in the whispers at the market and in the suspicious glances of the neighbors. People started talking about me, cruel things that I knew didn't just appear by chance. One morning at the market when I went to buy vegetables, the vendor I always dealt with took my arm and whispered fearfully, "Mrs. Rose, they say you're losing your memory, that you make mistakes with money. Be careful." I froze the basket clutched in my hands, feeling my heart squeeze. In that instant, I knew it was the work of Claire Evelyn's sister. She had already started spreading rumors, just as they had planned. "Thank you for telling me," I replied, trying to sound calm, although rage was burning inside me. Not only did they want to destroy Jason, they also sought to turn me into a crazy old woman whom no one would believe, whom no one would listen to. When I got home, I entered the living room and saw Claire sitting there with her laptop open on the table. She was talking on the phone in a tone full of self-importance. "Yes, publish the article immediately. Just say that old woman always meddles in the company's business and ruins everything." When I walked in, she hung up, immediately looked up and glanced at me with a fake smile. "Hello, how are you, Auntie? What did you buy at the market?" Her gaze was cold, as if she wanted to strip me of the minimal respect I deserved. I just nodded without answering because I knew if I opened my mouth, I couldn't contain my rage. I turned around, my hand clenched my heart in pieces. They not only wanted to kick me out of the family, they also wanted to destroy the honor I had cared for all my life. That night, Jason came home with a thick stack of documents, his face tenser than usual. I was in the corner of the kitchen watching in silence. When he put the papers on the dining room table, I managed to see written on the cover, Mr. Barnes. That name made my heart pound. A lawyer, someone Dylan had heard Evelyn talk about in a secret call. I waited for Jason to go take a shower and carefully approached the table. My hands trembled as I flipped through a few pages. On the first page, I saw a signature identical to Jason's, but the stroke was shaky without the natural force I had seen so many times. That was not my son's signature. I took out my old cell phone and tried to take a quick photo. The light from the screen illuminated my face, reflecting both fear and determination. Just at that moment, Evelyn suddenly appeared in the kitchen. I jumped. I almost dropped the phone. She narrowed her eyes, her voice sweet, but loaded with suspicion. "What are you photographing, Mom?" I tried to stay calm and answered quickly. "Just a cooking recipe. I'm looking for a new dish for Dylan." She let out a dry laugh, her gaze scanning me as if she wanted to see right through me. "Be careful with that old phone, it could break easily," she said and left. I stood there, my heart pounding, hugging the phone as if it were a life-or-death secret. I knew she suspected me, and that I had to be more cautious than ever. The next day, Mark appeared at the door with a small suitcase. He entered with a fake smile, patting Jason on the shoulder, as if they were great friends. "Come on, brother. We have something important today," he said in a confident voice. The two went into the study and closed the door. I stayed in the hallway pretending to dust, but with my ear attentive to every sound. Through the crack, I managed to hear Mark's voice. "Don't worry, Barnes is handling the legal side. Henry handles the books. No one will be able to question anything." Jason sighed, tired. "I don't want to cheat, Mark." Mark let out a laugh and patted him on the shoulder again. "This isn't cheating, it's strategy. You want the company to grow, don't you?" I held my breath, feeling the blood in my body freeze. Jason was being led step by step without realizing it. I retreated to the kitchen, my mind in a knot. Mark wasn't just simple support, he was the one pulling the strings, dragging Jason into a perfectly set trap. I thought about Dylan, about the scared look he had when he told me about that night conversation. I thought about Jason, my son, the same boy who used to sit on my lap, now manipulated by his own wife and brother-in-law. My soul ached, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to find more proof. I had to protect my son. That night late, when everyone was asleep, I passed by the study. The door was ajar, and I saw Henry, the company accountant, sitting next to Mark. They were reviewing files, the laptop light illuminating their faces. On the table, I managed to make out a folder titled, Adjusted Balance Confidential. Henry typed while smiling, his voice triumphant. We just need to add a few more zeros and Jason will be the perfect embezzler. No one will suspect anything. Mark nodded, his eyes shining with satisfaction. Good. We just need to get through the shareholder meeting and it will all be done. I held my breath, stepped back, clutching the phone tightly with the photo of the fake signature. I wanted to go in. I wanted to scream, but I knew I couldn't. If they discovered me now, everything would fall apart, and Dylan would be in danger. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen cleaning some dishes, trying to keep busy to forget Claire's cruel words and Evelyn's fake smile. Suddenly, a murmur in the living room made me stop cold. I walked on tiptoe. I hid behind the old wooden door with my heart racing. Through the crack, I saw Evelyn and Mark sitting very close on the sofa. Her hand was resting on his shoulder, a gesture so intimate it chilled my blood. They were whispering something, their voices low but full of calculation. I didn't hear clearly, but their looks, the way they gazed at each other, it was as if they shared a forbidden secret. I turned toward the hallway and saw Teresa, the housekeeper for years, pressed against the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, full of worry. She looked at me and put a finger to her lips, asking me for silence. I nodded slowly and stepped back, my heart pounding. In that instant, I knew Teresa and I shared a secret. She, who always worked in silence, who always bowed her head to Evelyn's orders, had also seen something strange. I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. That night, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, Teresa came in and closed the door carefully. She looked around as if afraid of being watched and whispered, "Ma'am, I have something." From her old apron, she took out an old cell phone, the kind almost no one uses anymore. Her hand trembled as she turned on the screen. "Listen to this," she said, her voice so low I had to strain my ear. Then a recording played, and I felt the world collapse beneath my feet. Evelyn's voice, cold and full of malice, came from the phone. "After this meeting, Jason will lose all his credibility." "The company will be ours," Mark replied in a superb tone. "Exactly. And that old woman won't have a place in this house either." I trembled, my wet hands gripping the sink so I wouldn't fall. Their words were direct stabs to the heart. Not just Jason, but me too. They wanted to erase me from the family. I looked at Teresa, tears in my eyes. "Where did you get this?" She lowered her head, her voice shaky. "I heard them talking outside in the yard yesterday. I didn't want to get involved, but I can't stay quiet anymore. They've gone too far, Mrs. Rose." I took her hand, rough from so many years of hard work. "Thank you, Teresa," I said, my voice broken. "You saved my family." She shook her head, her eyes red. "I just did what was right. You and young Dylan are the only good ones in this house." Her words were like a warm breath on my frozen heart. In this home full of lies, there was still someone on my side, and that was enough to keep going. That same night, the family dinner went on as usual, but the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, laughing and chatting animatedly with Jason, as if nothing was wrong. Dylan was next to me, silent, avoiding looking at his mother. Suddenly, Evelyn turned to me with a sweet but venomous tone. "Mom, do you remember what day it is today, or did you forget again?" Everyone laughed forcedly, even Jason, although he only did it to calm the moment. I kept silent, looked down at my plate, feeling as if I had been slapped in front of everyone. But when I looked up, I met Teresa's eyes from the corner of the dining room. She looked at me firmly, as if saying without words, "We are going to win." After the meal, Jason went to work in the office. Dylan went up to his room to study. Evelyn and Mark sat on the porch. They continued whispering plans that I couldn't hear clearly. I called Teresa into the kitchen. I closed the door, and together we played the recording again. The cold sound of Evelyn and Mark's voices echoed as a reminder of what awaited Jason. I took the USB drive Chloe had given me and carefully saved several copies of the recording. "We have to keep this safe," I told Teresa. She nodded with a firm voice. "I will help you no matter what." That night, I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep a wink. In the hallway, I heard Evelyn giving orders to Teresa. "Tomorrow, make sure to clean the living room while important guests are coming. And remember that my mother-in-law is not to come near there." Her voice sounded cold, as if I were a nuisance that had to be kept away. I gripped the blanket tightly, holding back tears. But then my room door opened slowly. Teresa came in with a determined look. She nodded slightly, as if saying without words, "Don't worry, I'm on your side." I smiled weakly, feeling that I finally had a true ally in the darkness. In the days leading up to the shareholder meeting, the house felt heavy, as if a dark cloud hung over us. Every time I passed the study, Evelyn was there, coming and going, the phone glued to her ear, speaking in a low voice, as if hiding secrets. But as soon as she saw me, she immediately switched to a fake smile, as if nothing was wrong. "Mother-in-law, did you eat today?" she would ask sweetly, although her eyes remained hard. I just nodded, avoiding looking at her directly, because I knew she was watching my every move. Inside, anxiety grew like a stone in my chest. I clutched the USB drive Chloe had given me with Teresa's recording and the photos of the forged signature as if it were the only amulet that could protect me and Jason. That morning, Jason got dressed in an impeccable suit, standing in front of the mirror, his face tense though trying to appear confident. I approached silently and adjusted his shirt collar, like when he was a child, and I was getting him ready for school. My hand brushed the fabric, and I felt a weight in my heart wanting to warn him, but before I could speak, Evelyn intervened. "I'll take care of it, mother-in-law, you rest," she said, her voice soft but full of authority, pulling Jason away from me. I stood still, helpless, watching my son being dragged away without realizing it. Dylan was in a corner looking at me with worry, and suddenly he secretly passed me a small folded note. I opened it and saw his childish handwriting. "Grandma, I'm going to sit with you at the meeting." I gripped the paper, tightly moved by the boy, but hurt by Jason's naivety in the face of the trap surrounding him. Before leaving the house, I checked the USB in my coat pocket. My hand was trembling not from the cold, but because I knew this day would be decisive. I looked around the house, which was once a home and now seemed like a battlefield. "Rose, you have to do this," I told myself. I took a deep breath and walked through the door, following Jason and Dylan. In the company building, the boardroom was full. Investors in elegant suits, employees murmuring, and lawyers with heavy briefcases. I chose a seat at the back, trying to go unnoticed. Dylan sat glued to me, his small hand squeezing mine as if he feared I would disappear. "Don't worry, Grandma, I'm here," he whispered, his eyes firm, although his voice trembled. I smiled at him. I squeezed his hand, but my heart was racing as if it would burst out of my chest. Teresa was also there, pushing a cart of coffee and snacks disguised as a server, although I knew she was watching everything attentively, ready to support me when needed. The meeting began. Jason went up to the podium, his voice firm but with a hint of tension. He presented the new project, trying to convince the investors with numbers and plans. I looked at my son, my heart full of pride but also pain. He was giving his all for the company, for the family, without knowing he was about to be betrayed. It was Evelyn's turn. She clung to Jason's arm with a radiant smile but a cold gaze. "I have proof that the company's finances are facing serious problems," she declared, with a voice that echoed throughout the auditorium. The whole room stirred. Some investors murmured. Others frowned while Jason stood there, his face pale, not understanding what was happening. Mark came out with a laptop in his hand and a triumphant expression. He connected the equipment to the projector. The blue light flickered, and then documents appeared on the screen with a bold title, "Financial Report Irregularities." Figures, signatures, and phrases accusing Jason of diverting money from the company were projected large. The auditorium fell silent, then filled with whispers. Jason looked around, his eyes wide, stammering. "No, it's not true. I didn't do anything wrong." But no one was listening to him. An elderly investor shook his head and murmured to the person next to him, "What a disappointment." I gripped the USB drive tightly in my hand, my heart racing. I knew it was time to act, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely move. Dylan took my hand firmly and whispered, "Grandma now." I nodded, took a deep breath, and stood up, walking toward the technician in the corner of the room. "Please connect this." I asked him, my voice trembling, but trying to stay calm as I handed him the drive. He looked at me with some doubt, but finally nodded and connected it to the projector. Just as Mark was moving to the next slide, the screen suddenly went dark. The room fell silent, tense. Suddenly, like a lightning bolt, Evelyn's voice resonated from the speakers. "After this meeting, Jason will lose all his credibility. The company will be ours." Mark's laugh followed, cold and satisfied. The entire room was motionless, only the speaker repeating every word. Some investors turned their gaze toward me, their eyes wide with surprise. I tilted my head slightly, confirming that I was the one who had prepared this proof. Dylan squeezed my hand tighter, his gaze lit with hope. The screen changed again. Images from a security camera appeared Evelyn and Mark in a coffee shop exchanging documents with gestures too close to deny. The murmurs grew. Then a scan of a forged signature of Jason's was projected, prepared by Barnes and Henry. The shaky, forced stroke, nothing like my son's real signature. The auditorium erupted. Some stood up taking photos of the screen. Others murmured, "This is forgery unbelievable." Jason stood petrified, his gaze fixed on the screen as if his whole world had collapsed. Evelyn Pale ran toward the stage, trying to turn off the computer. "Stop! This is a mistake!" she screamed, her voice breaking. But it was too late. Everyone in the room had seen. An older investor stood up and said in a severe tone, "How do you explain this, Mrs. Evelyn?" She stammered, unable to give an answer, her wild eyes scanning the room in panic. I squeezed Dylan's hand tightly. My heart was pounding, relieved that the truth had come out, but also with immense pain, knowing that my son was experiencing a blow that nothing could repair. But before I could react, Claire Evelyn's sister ran out from the guest rows and jumped onto the stage, pointing her finger at me with a shrill voice. "This is her invention, a senile old woman who just wants to destroy her son's family." Her words were like a knife, sharp and cruel, which made the whole room fall silent for an instant. I stood there, my legs trembling, feeling that the whole world was looking at me with suspicion. Claire continued, her eyes wild. "She envies my sister. She envies Jason's happiness. This is all a setup." I opened my mouth, wanting to respond, but my throat closed up, the words wouldn't come out. The pain of being defamed, of being treated like a crazy woman, tightened my chest. I was just a 65-year-old woman who wanted to protect her son and grandson, and now they had turned me into an enemy within my own family. But right at that moment, a childish but firm voice was heard from the middle rows. Mason Dillon's schoolmate suddenly stood up, his face red with nerves, but with a sure gaze. "I saw Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Mark meeting many times at the cafe near the school." "It wasn't just one time," the boy said, his voice trembling but clear. The whole room erupted in murmurs. An older investor murmured suspiciously, "That boy has no reason to lie." Another nodded, "Kids don't make things like that up." Mason's words were like a ray of light that dispelled the fog of doubt that Claire had tried to raise. I looked at the boy and felt a deep gratitude. Dylan squeezed my hand tightly. His eyes lit up with hope. Evelyn, standing on the stage, completely lost control. She ran toward the technician, trying to snatch the microphone from him, and screamed, "It's all fake! They made this up to ruin me!" But her voice sounded broken, desperate, without the authority of before. Everyone in the room looked at her no longer with trust, but with suspicion and judgment. It was then that Teresa, the family's silent employee, pushed the cart of tea and pastries to the center of the room. She stopped in front of the counsel's neutral lawyer, and taking a copy on USB from her apron, she handed it directly to him. "Here you go, sir," she said in a calm but firm voice. "Save another copy just to be sure." The lawyer, an older man with thick glasses, took the USB and connected it to his computer. He reviewed the files with a serious expression. After a few tense minutes, he stood up and said in a clear voice, "The information matches. The recordings, the images, everything is authentic evidence." The room erupted. Some investors clapped. Others took out their cell phones to record, as if they wanted to preserve the moment when justice was served. Mark, who was in a corner of the stage, tried to leave furiously, his face red with rage and desperation. But two plainclothes police officers stepped forward and blocked his path. One of them spoke in a cold voice. "Mr. Mark, Mrs. Evelyn, Mr. Barnes, Mr. Henry, you are under suspicion of fraud and document forgery. Come with us." Evelyn burst into tears, her hair disheveled, pointing her finger at me. "Mom, you are going to regret this." Her voice boomed, but it had no strength anymore. It just sounded like the desperate cry of someone defeated. The police put her in handcuffs and took her away along with Mark Barnes and Henry the accountant, who walked with his head down, not daring to look at anyone. The atmosphere in the room exploded. Some clapped, others whispered among themselves, but I just remained silent, with Dylan's hand gripping mine tightly. The boy's eyes were shining as if he had just witnessed justice being done. "You did it, Grandma," Dylan murmured, his voice shaky. I smiled at him, but inside I didn't feel completely relieved. I looked up at the stage where Jason was collapsing in his chair, covering his face with his hands. For the first time, he wasn't defending Evelyn. He wasn't saying things like, "Mom, don't take it to heart," or "Evelyn worries about me." He was there exhausted like a lost child in the middle of the storm. I approached Jason and put my hand on his shoulder. He lifted his head, his eyes red, full of regret. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. "I am so sorry." His words pierced my heart, not from pain, but because I knew he was blaming himself. I squeezed his shoulder, trying to keep my voice serene. "You don't have to apologize. The important thing is that the truth came out." But inside it hurt too much. Jason, the son I had loved and protected all my life, was now broken by the betrayal of the woman he trusted most. Dylan ran to his father, hugged him, and tears rolled down his cheeks. "Dad, Grandma and I just wanted to save you," he said with a trembling voice. Jason held his son tightly as if he were the only support he had left. I stood there watching the two of them, my heart torn between satisfaction and sadness. I had won, but the price was the breaking of this family. Evelyn, Mark, and their accomplices had been unmasked, but the wounds they left would not be easy to heal. Teresa approached me with a sweet but firm look. "Mrs. Rose, we did it," she murmured. I took her hand, my voice choked. "Teresa, without you, I couldn't have done it." She shook her head and smiled. "We did it together, for Mr. Jason, for Dylan." The room began to empty. Some investors approached to shake my hand with a look full of respect. "You are very brave, Mrs. Rose." I just nodded without answering because I didn't feel brave. I was just an old woman who had done everything for her son and grandson. When the police took Evelyn, Mark, and the other accomplices away, the room was still full of murmurs. The investors talked among themselves with looks that ranged from surprise to indignation. Some still had their phones in hand, as if they wanted to save the moment when justice had been served. But I wasn't paying attention to that noise. My eyes were only on Jason. My son collapsed in the chair, his head in his hands, his face as if he had just lost everything. He said nothing, just remained motionless, like a statue eroded by time. My heart shrank not from the victory over Evelyn, but because I knew my son was shattered. I approached each step heavy with the years I had spent protecting him. I put my hand on his shoulder gently, like when he was a child, and ran to me when he was scared. He lifted his head a little, his eyes swollen full of tears. "Mom," his voice trembled on the verge of breaking. "I didn't believe you. I let Evelyn guide me, let Mark manipulate me. I was an ungrateful son." His words pierced my soul, not because he was reproaching me, but because I clearly saw the pain in his eyes. Jason, the man who was always strong and sure of himself, was now just a lost child, betrayed by the person he loved most. I squeezed his shoulder tightly, trying to keep my voice firm. "Son," I said, "the truth finally came out. The price you pay is today's pain, but at least it's not too late. I don't blame you. I can't blame you. I just want you to know that no matter what, I'm still here. I'm still your mother." Jason looked at me, his eyes full of regret, but he said nothing more. He just lowered his head as if trying to hide his tears. Dylan, my grandson, ran to his father and hugged him tightly. The boy cried as he said, his voice shaky, "I was afraid Dad would hate me if I said it, but Grandma believed me, and she saved Dad." His words were like a gust of warm air that cut through that icy room. Jason looked at his son with astonishment, then hugged him to his chest, his shoulders shaking. "Thank you, Dylan," he whispered. "You were the one who saved this whole family." I stood there watching father and son embrace my heart, torn between joy and sadness. Dylan, a boy of only 12, had shown more courage than many adults, and I felt proud of him, although it also hurt me that he had to face things no child should have to. Some investors approached, shaking Jason's hand with voices that were both encouraging and warning. "Mr. Jason, you need time, but we believe in your innocence," said an older man with a sincere look, although he couldn't hide the warning in his eyes. "Reorganize the company, don't let the bad guys take advantage again." Another patted him on the shoulder. "We still support you, but you have to be stronger." Their words were both supportive and pressuring. I looked at Jason and saw him nod, although his gaze remained empty. I knew my son was at a crossroads. Either he would break down forever, or he would rise stronger than before. But at that moment, he looked like a man from whom all life force had been ripped away. On the way home, Jason drove in silence. Dylan fell asleep in my arms, his head resting on my shoulder, breathing peacefully. I looked at his little face, still childish, but already marked by the scars of the truth. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Jason, his eyes red, holding back tears, his hands gripping the steering wheel. No one said anything, but that silence weighed more than any word. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I knew no words could ease his pain right now. Evelyn had not only betrayed him, she had also destroyed his trust, his love, and the family he had built. Arriving home, Jason stopped the car but didn't get out right away. He sat for a long time, staring at the front door as if it led to a strange place. Finally, he looked at me and said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, starting tomorrow, I will put you in the place you deserve. No one will ever disrespect you again." His words tightened my heart. I said nothing, just nodded gently, and squeezed his hand, the same hand I held when he was a child, when he still needed his mother to guide him. Now it seemed the roles were reversed. I had to guide him, even though I too was tired and hurt. 1 month after that shareholder meeting, the trial began. I arrived early at the courthouse and sat in the public area next to Dylan and Teresa. The atmosphere in the room was cold, but I felt the weight of that day. It was time for the truth to take its place, for those who had harmed my family to pay for it. Dylan sat glued to me, his little hand squeezing mine with a look between worry and hope. Teresa, with her worn apron, was on the other side with the same firmness as the day she gave me that recording that saved the whole family. I looked at both of them, and a wave of gratitude washed over me. They were my unexpected allies, the people who had helped a 65-year-old woman stand up and face the darkness. When they brought Evelyn in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair, which was always well-groomed, was now matted, and the orange prisoner uniform made her look smaller. But her eyes were still cold, trying to keep her head high as if she didn't accept defeat. When she saw me, she gritted her teeth and her voice hissed. "You ruined everything, Mrs. Rose." Her words were like a knife, but I didn't respond. I just turned to hug Dylan, pulling him closer. "Don't pay attention to her, honey," I whispered, trying to stay calm. Dylan nodded, but I felt his hand tremble. I knew he was still scared, even though the truth had already come out. The trial began. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with a sharp voice, presented all the evidence. The recording from the company played, and Evelyn and Mark's voices silenced the room again. After this meeting, Jason will lose all credibility. The company will be ours. They showed Jason's forged signature, the seals that didn't match, and the testimony of Mason, Dylan's classmate. Mason, although just a child, stood before the court with impressive courage and repeated what he had seen. I saw Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Mark meeting at the cafe near the school, several times exchanging documents. His words were like a breath of air that dispelled all remaining doubts. Mr. Barnes-Evelyn's lawyer tried to deny everything, claiming the evidence was the product of personal resentment. But the counsel's lawyer, a calm man, exposed one by one the repeated irregularities in the forged documents. Henry, the company accountant, lowered his head and finally admitted, "They bought me. I did what Mark ordered." Claire Evelyn's sister was also dragged into the investigation for spreading slander against me. She sat on the bench, avoiding eye contact without the arrogance of before when she called me a senile old woman. Finally, the judge stood up, and his voice boomed firmly. After reviewing the evidence, the court sentences Evelyn Garcia, 12 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy to commit dispossession. Mark Vargas, 15 years for economic fraud and complicity. Mr. Barnes, 8 years for forgery of legal documents. Henry Morales, 6 years for fabricating false vouchers. Claire Garcia, 3 years of probation and banned from working in media. When the sentence was read, the room fell silent. Only the scratching of the secretary's pen could be heard. I squeezed Dylan's hand, feeling as if a stone had been lifted from my chest. He looked at me with shining eyes. "Grandma, is it all over?" I smiled, squeezing his hand tightly. "Yes, honey, it's over." As we left the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, as if the sky itself was celebrating. But inside me, joy mixed with sadness. Justice had triumphed, but my family was left with wounds that were hard to heal. I looked at Dylan, who was still holding my hand, and at Teresa, who walked behind us in silence with a maternal and tender gaze. "Mrs. Rose, you are stronger than I thought," she said with a shaky voice. I took her hand and replied, "No, Teresa, we are strong together." A few weeks later, our house had its first family dinner after so many dark days. This time, Jason was the one who pulled out my chair, inviting me to sit in the middle of the table. "Mom, this place is for you," he said in a grave but firm voice. Dylan chatted nonstop about school, about a math problem he had solved, about the soccer game with Mason. Teresa smiled while serving the food, and for the first time she sat at the table with us as part of the family. Evelyn was no longer there. There were no cold stares or hurtful comments. The house truly felt at peace, simple and warm, like in those days when my husband was still alive. I decided, along with Father Michael and Chloe, to create a small fund to support elderly women who have been rejected by their families. The idea came to me on a sleepless night when I remembered those days when I was pushed aside, treated like a nuisance in my own house. I wanted to help women like me, women who believe that old age only means silence. The inauguration ceremony for the fund was held in the parish hall with many people present. Father Michael was by my side smiling. "Rose, you have turned pain into hope for others." Chloe, with her youthful enthusiasm, helped me organize everything from the paperwork to the fundraising. When I went up to the podium to speak, my heart was pounding, but not from fear, from pride. Dylan was sitting in the front row, clapping loudly, his eyes shining like stars. Jason stood up, and for the first time he hugged me in public. "This is the woman who saved my entire family," he said, his voice broken. The whole room applauded, but I only looked at Jason and Dylan, feeling my heart overflow with emotion. I didn't say much, I just shared. I used to think that old age meant silence, but no. Old age can still be a flame that illuminates the truth. If the darkness can hide lies, it was also in that darkness that a 12-year-old boy ignited the dawn for my entire family. That night, returning home, I sat in my small room with the lamplight still flickering as always. But this time, I didn't feel alone. I looked at the family photo on the wall. Now it was just me, Jason, and Dylan. We had lost a lot, but we had also found each other again. I thought about the past days, about the nights I trembled with fear in the dark, about the times I thought I was going to fall. But I stayed standing, not just for me, but for those I love. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. The dawn had arrived, and I knew my family would move forward together. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I am truly curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.